Greetings of the season and welcome to Fuqua LinkedIn Live. I'm Bill Bolding and it is my privilege to be Dean of Duke's Fuqua School of Business. I'm going to start talking, but eventually I hope to be able to respond to questions, so please put those questions into comments. So I'm going to start with the obvious, which is we've been in crisis. We've faced terrible traumatic conditions with COVID that have been, it's incredible health crisis, incredible economic crisis that's been very uneven, and a crisis of marginalization that we've seen around the world. But behind that crisis or set of crises is an additional crisis, which is our inability to come together effectively in dealing with those crises has led to yet another crisis, which is a crisis in terms of loss of faith, loss of trust, and therefore a loss of belief in the leadership that we have in this country and around the world. And in fact, you can measure this loss of trust. The majority of people in this country and around the world believe that we are in the midst of a misinformation crisis. And that, of course, is what's undermining trust in society. And so we have this crisis of leadership connected to this crisis of trust. And as a result, if you think about your challenge as business leaders, it's never been harder to be a business leader in this environment. But at the same time, to sound a note of optimism, I think there's never been more opportunity. And the opportunity, to kind of summarize where I'm headed, is if we can inspire and motivate our teams, and if we can heal the damage that's been done by COVID, then we do have this unparalleled opportunity to do something special using business leadership and the platform of business. So when I talk about this crisis of leadership and crisis of trust, this is a measurable crisis. We have data that we can point to. And so I'm going to point to data rather than just give you my opinions on this. And when I talk about data, I'm referring to data collected by a group called the Edelman Trust Barometer. And these are data collected from 17,000 people from 14 countries around the world. And so these results hold for the US, but they hold globally. And some of the things that they found may surprise or even shock you in terms of what has happened to business in the face of this COVID crisis. So the reality is that in this moment, business is actually moving into a more positive, more favorable position. And in fact, there are four groups that are generally considered to advance the interests of society: government, non-governmental organizations, media, and business. And among these groups, at this moment in time, business is actually the only trusted group, the only group that is considered to be both competent and ethical. And the big change here, if you reflect on how business was viewed after the last significant economic crisis, the financial crisis of 2008, is we were not considered to be ethical, but now we are. And so this is in large measure in response to how business has handled the COVID crisis. And if you unpack why is it that business has moved up in the estimation of individuals around the world in terms of their level of trust, you find things like, well, the most trusted institution in business is actually my employer. If I ask, who am I going to trust to give me advice about the pandemic, the answer is my employer. If you ask, who is the most trusted leader in society, the answer is my CEO. And so this is an extraordinary time to be in this position. And the simple thing I would say is, now that we've gotten into this position where business has a moment where we are trusted, we cannot fail. And the reality is, it's going to be complicated to retain that trust, because it's not necessarily just a moment when business is really changed in how it's viewed. It's at an inflection point potentially, because it's not just that trust has gone up, expectations of the role of business leadership have also profoundly changed. What do I mean by that? 86% of people surveyed said they expect their company to speak out and act on societal issues. 68% say that business should step in where government fails, and a lot of the other data suggests that government is failing around the world. And in fact, if you look at the effects of COVID, what you'll see is that number has gone up considerably, almost by half, that 33% now believe that business should step in where government fails as a consequence of what's happened during the COVID crisis. But what are some of these things where people have expectations? Well, 84% say that business should weigh in on vaccine hesitancy, an issue that has been very complicated in various countries around the world. 81% say that business should weigh in on climate change. 79% say that it should weigh in on issues of social justice and equity. 79% say that business needs to weigh in on this crisis of misinformation, the so-called infodemic. And so what we're seeing is this extraordinary time where business is trusted, it can do so much more, and the expectations around the role that it will play in society have changed pretty dramatically. However, changing from optimism to kind of hard reality, taking advantage of this inflection point will not be simple. The same people who said they want their companies to take action on various societal issues also said, but don't take political sides. And this, of course, makes life very complicated for every business leader, because if you reflect on some of the examples I gave where individuals expect action from their companies, those issues have largely become politicized in society. And in fact, what I would argue is that we have two contagions going on simultaneously. We have the COVID contagion that everyone is all too aware of and familiar with, but we have a second contagion, which is a contagion of polarization. And that polarization is fundamentally what's behind the breakdown in trust in various institutions in society. That polarization freezes our ability to act in the general interests of society and to advance the common good as people take sides on what is best for society. And so when it comes to COVID, we have vaccines, we have antiviral treatments. The question is, what do we have to deal with the contagion of polarization? And the answer is, I think that we need to have each and every business leader serve as an antiviral agent. We need you to be the ones to really live up to the potential that we have as a community to take advantage of the power of business to really change society for the better. And so the question is, how can we do that? How can we be the leaders of consequence that the world needs so badly to drive the positive impact of business in the world? And in my opinion, I will give you opinions that are supported by a fair amount of evidence, but the opinion is that there are three things that we need from business leaders today to take advantage of this moment and really change the trajectory with respect to the role of business in society. The first one is, if we're going to have business leaders be the antiviral agents, then there has to be a commitment to using business as a force for good. We have to be serious in living up to this opportunity to use business as a platform to improve lives, to create value in society, to lead to better lives for employees, and so on and so forth, and a really strong belief that we can make our companies better while doing what's best for society. If we fail to live up to this idea that we're really interested in making lives better, then I think we'll very quickly lose the trust that's been built up during the COVID crisis. The second thing that I think is necessary to unlock this potential of business is something that we stand for at Fuqua very clearly, which is an understanding that a great team will beat a great individual. And when I say this, there are a couple of things that we know about great teams from extensive research. The first one is that we know that diverse teams under certain conditions will beat homogeneous teams. And so we need to let all talent in the game. Now, what I'll note here is this contagion of polarization is actually actively working against our ability to create great teams, as you have people who are trying to create teams that are all the same in terms of I only want people on my team who think the same things, believe the same things, look the same way, whatever that might be, we have a serious issue of polarization, which is creating homogeneity, which is the enemy of great teams. The second thing that I'll point to that we know about great teams is we know the condition under which the diverse team outperforms a homogeneous team. And we actually have extensive evidence that this will happen in terms of financial performance, in terms of innovation, all kinds of key performance indicators that tell us how we're doing with respect to business performance. And what we know is that people will not give you their best, that team will not actually be a functional team unless that team feels like every member belongs. And so this is the second issue that we have to be completely tuned into as we think about the role of teams in this current environment. Because here we have what I will call a COVID hangover, which is to say, we're at a moment in time when it's very difficult to make people feel like they belong. And we are at a moment in time when everybody is really thinking about themselves. Are they being treated fairly? Are they being given the support they need? And this has led to what I will call a fundamental shift in culture from we thinking about the team to me, what is my situation? What are my problems? And what are people doing to support me? The evidence I would point to that suggests this we to me culture shift is very pronounced due to COVID is the following. The key stakeholder pre-COVID was customers. The key stakeholder in the midst of this COVID pandemic is now employees. And so this shift to it's about me. And so we're going to have to be very, very thoughtful about how do we make people feel like they belong when they're in their own heads. How do we get them to feel like they belong to a team and make them understand that that team is important? Now, the second thing that we have to realize with respect to COVID is that COVID has produced an enormous amount of fear and an enormous amount of isolation as a consequence of the policies we've had to enact with COVID. And what you should recognize is that even though we see so many promising signs about the treatments, the ability to mitigate the impact of COVID and switch from a pandemic to something that's endemic, that most people, almost 70% of people around the world now worry that the next pandemic is likely to happen and it will be even worse than COVID. So fear is still very pronounced in the minds of your teams. And the isolation, of course, has another pernicious effect, which is isolation is the cause of burnout. And so what we need to do is we need to heal our teams. We need to make them feel like they belong. We need to reduce the fear they feel. We need to reduce the sense of isolation they fear and make them feel like they are part of something that is important. Now, that brings me to the third thing that I believe we need from business leaders today in order to seize this moment, which is I think it will take triple threat capability in the face of all of this fear, all this isolation, all this sense of I don't belong, I haven't been treated fairly, to be able to create these great teams. And in fact, I would argue that we need triple threat leadership capability. The first one is, of course, we need IQ. We have to have business competence. Part of the fear that people have is my company going to be able to navigate this pandemic in a way that we will remain healthy, my job will remain a wonderful opportunity, that there'll be more opportunities. And so you have to have the business competence to be able to navigate the environment and not just survive, but hopefully to thrive as we move beyond and through this pandemic. The second thing, though, is you need emotional intelligence. If the belief is that a great team will beat a great individual, then you need people who can be great on teams. You need to have people who understand the emotions that people are feeling, especially in this time when there's so much fear, so much anxiety, so much stress, so much burnout, all the things that people are feeling that are a consequence of this COVID hangover. we need people who are empathetic and understand that, and also have the ability to regulate their own emotions so they can connect with these teams and help them turn into great teams. But that's not enough. The third thing that you need, in my opinion, to really navigate successfully this opportunity we have to use business as this incredible agent for change in society is we need people with DQ, or a decency quotient. We need people who actually will care for, value, and respect others to bring them back to health from the incredible damage that's been wrought by COVID. We need people who will elevate others and make them successful so that they will be selfless rather than selfish. Because right now we are in an era, and it's not a criticism, it's a reality, where people have become more selfish as a consequence of COVID. We need people with the humility to learn from others, because no matter how smart you are, there are other people who know things that you don't know. And we need people with the integrity to be transparent with and accountable to others. And so if we can stand for these three things, if we can live up to these leadership capabilities and requirements of the time, then I would close my remarks simply by saying, this is your time as a business leader. This is when we need you to inspire and motivate your teams, your organizations, and this is when we need you to heal your teams so that we can take advantage of the amazing potential that business has to make all of our lives better. Thank you, and now I will turn things over so that people can ask questions. Okay, so my first question is, what is the role of business in helping decrease polarization in society? And this is a really important question, because what we're seeing is in society that the institutions that have normally been thought to be the institutions to advance the common good are falling victim to this contagion of polarization. And right now, business, instead of falling victim to that, is standing up taller, is moving forward in the eyes of people around the world in terms of our ability to actually unify people. There's a wonderful quote from the poet Yeats that I like to use, which is, talent perceives differences, genius unity. And so what we need in the business community is genius to recognize how we can bring people together, because in fact, that has always been the role of business. We have people in our companies that are wildly diverse, that come from all walks of life, all kinds of beliefs, all backgrounds, you name it, and you have incredible diversity in companies around the world. And yet we bring them together. Instead of being victims of polarization, we bring them together to get them to act with common purpose, because we elevate the meaning and purpose of the work we do. And so the first thing is, we have to be able to create a compelling vision for everyone on our team about, this is why your work matters. This is why our organization matters. This is our opportunity to make our company better while doing what's best for society. And so that's the inspirational or motivational part. But the other thing is, let's be realistic. We're facing a moment where we could go in one of two directions. That polarization could just as easily infect the business community if we can't thread these needles around being asked to weigh in on issues which have become political. If we can't thread that needle, then that polarization might enter into our workforces, as opposed to the ideal scenario, in my opinion, which is business is a role model for other institutions in showing how we still have the ability to have a group of wildly different people come together and act with common purpose and do something that is really valuable in society. So the next question is, do I think that this positive perception of business is a permanent shift? Are we seeing a new era? And here's where this is a profoundly important question, because my answer is not necessarily. Not necessarily. If we don't live up to these expectations in terms of how we will use the platform of business, if we do not fulfill the trust that has been given to us in terms of our ability to take actions that make our companies and our countries and our communities better, then that trust could be extremely fleeting. And so this is a moment of time where we have to be on it, like seriously on it, and recognize we've been elevated in this position. We are more in the spotlight than ever before because we're viewed to be more capable and more ethical than ever before. We cannot disappoint. We cannot miss this moment in time so that we can make it something that becomes more permanent as opposed to something that is fleeting. And we then have to go back to the drawing board and try to rebuild this trust in a serious way. So that's why every group I talk to, I say, this is your time. Do not take this time lightly. I understand it is the most difficult time you've ever faced in terms of business leadership, given the complexities of the world, given the complexity of the expectations, given the damage that we've seen through these twin contagions of COVID and polarization. But this is our time. This is when we can truly have more opportunity to make a difference than ever before. And so that's something that I take very seriously. Now, how do we instill common purpose among people who are very different? Not a simple answer to what is a very straightforward question, a very, very important question, because this is where we have to be incredibly sensitive to the reality that we're dealing with individuals who have suffered through really, really, as I said at the beginning, terrible, traumatic and terrifying times. And that's put people in their own heads. And so the first thing that we have to do is we have to help those people heal. Now, ironically, one of the ways that we can best people heal is simply to connect with them on really not matters of work or matters of enormous substance, but just connect with them as human beings, remind each other that we are human. Because once we can do that, once we're no longer icons on a computer screen, we begin to treat each other with more respect, more kindness, more thoughtfulness. And we have to reestablish what it means to treat each other like human beings. You see data in every walk of life that suggests that people don't have the patience and the tolerance for one another. And so we see more violent crime, we see more traffic accidents, we see more fights in concession stand lines. We see this playing out again and again. We see terrible behavior on airplanes. And so we have to rehumanize. And that's kind of step one. But the next thing we have to do is we're going to have to get people to give grace and understand that when people are different, they will think different things. This is not something to be angry about with each other. This is not something that we should fear about one another. This is something that we should embrace because it's these differences that give us the opportunity to get better, to be so much more innovative than we could be if we're on our own or surround ourselves with like-minded people. And so we have to build tolerance around the idea of everything you hear may not be exactly what you wanted to hear, but we need to rebuild listening skills. And so one of the things that again, a quote that I love that I heard from David Taylor when he was CEO of Procter & Gamble is, as we think about communication, what does that mean? And the quote from him was, are you listening or are you waiting to speak? And we're now at a moment in time when people have really stopped listening and they're just waiting to speak. But communication is just as much about listening as it is about our ability to shape our ideas. And we need to back away from the idea that every interaction that we have with others is an attempt or a moment when we can convince them of the rightness of our ideas, as opposed to really embracing those as opportunities to hear from one another and learn from one another. And this is where I think decency in particular becomes so important, that we really do value the opportunity to learn from others, that we really do have the humility to understand that we don't know everything. And so if we can fully embrace decency during this time, we'll go a lot farther in terms of our ability to create, to have the genius required to create unity, because it is no trivial thing when people are so different. So next question. Okay, so this question is really related to what I was just talking about, which is how do we work to create more heterogeneous teams and foster collaboration and discovery and harmony among employees with diverse backgrounds and ways of thinking. And so this notion of harmony, I think is important, and yet we have to be careful that we don't put all of our weight on harmony, which then suppresses our ability to actually explore the differences that we have with one another. So one of the mistakes that people sometimes make when they think about what does it mean to have a high decency quotient is a belief that I just have to be nice to everybody. That's the key thing. I'm just nice and kind and gentle and thoughtful. But remember that one of the dimensions of decency that I made reference to was that we have the integrity to be honest and transparent with each other, and the integrity to be accountable to each other, that others are accountable to us and we're accountable to others. And that accountability is a very important thing. And what that means is we can't avoid the topics where we do have differences of opinion, because if we do, all we'll create is harmony on the surface, no real progress in terms of unlocking the potential that comes along with the differences that exist, and simmering discontent beneath the surface as we don't deal with those differences. And so this is where I'll just come back to the point I made before. You have to be very careful as you walk into these conversations with full honesty and transparency, which is if you start like that immediately and people have not kind of had the opportunity to see you as a human being, then you might run into a buzzsaw when you do that. And so again, there's this healing process that goes along with the ability to inspire, to motivate, and to draw out what others have to share, as opposed to them feeling like you're going to jam down their throats everything that you think is important without respecting their views. And so everything that I'm saying it's one thing to say it, it's another thing to live it. And that's why I say this is one of the most difficult times for business leadership, because the ability to keep people harmonious in terms of the kind of the ultimate sense of, I love my team. I don't always agree with my team. I don't always have the same ideas, but I love being a part of this team. I belong with this team, and I believe that what we're doing is important. And if we can maintain those things, those are the points of harmony that I think are critical, as opposed to mistaking harmony for we're just all going to pretend to be nice to each other, even if we don't actually think that much of each other. So let's remember that a critical element of business leadership that always has been true and is true now more than ever is authentic leadership, that you can't hide behind some veneer. You have to authentically believe in what you're doing. And in this moment in time, if you can make that work, as I said, you have an incredible opportunity to use the platform of business in ways that we have not yet seen. So with that, I think we're reaching the end of the time that's allotted for our LinkedIn Live series. I'd like to thank you all so much for joining us today. And I want to let you know that we will be pausing our LinkedIn Live series for the holiday season. And we'll be back live on Wednesday, January 5th at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time. And please do follow Fuqua on LinkedIn to be alerted to these events that are happening with LinkedIn Live. And finally, given the very, very difficult times that we're in, please, all of you, be well. Thank you so much.